Hey lifers, Dustin here, and I'm going to be completely honest with you, as transparent as I can possibly be. I have no idea what to do. Absolutely none. I have no idea what to do. Nothing matters. Everything got turned upside down this weekend. I stayed up until 2 o'clock Eastern Time watching Arizona State beat Washington at home. That is in the same weekend where number 10 Auburn, who looked indestructible all the way up until at least the Georgia game, lost to an LSU team who 2 weeks ago lost to Troy. That is before on Friday night, or I guess after, on Friday night, Washington State had 7 turnovers and got destroyed at home, I can't even talk, on the road at Cal, which that game aired right after Clemson, with a quarterback who should have never been on the field, traveling up to Syracuse in a redemption game for Syracuse's quarterback, in the biggest win that Syracuse's program has had since Donovan McNabb left, probably, at least that comes to my brain. And both of those last 2 games were on Friday the 13th, because of course they were. That's before 3 other top 25 teams lost, all of them to unranked teams, on a weekend where everyone thought everything was going to be in this nice, perfect little package. We were just going to go into this weekend. There may be a couple of struggles. A couple of top 25 teams may lose, sure. That tends to happen. It's kind of weird when they don't. But, if number 23, I'm just throwing a number out, lost, whatever, right? 4 top 10 teams lost, all to unranked teams. 7 top 25 teams lost. So, I don't really know what to do. At this point, there are a couple of things that are clear and a whole lot of things that are not. So, this episode is going to be very different than any of the top 25 episodes I've done in the first 3 years that I've actually done this type of video, this type of show. Normally, I show the AP top 25. I made a few notes about what I thought about the rankings. Then I'll put up my top 25, talk about why I slotted a few teams where. Then I put them up side by side, and we all go home. You go to the comment section, tell me your top 25. I'll look them over. Most of them seem reasonable. If not, I type in a few questions, or I respond to a few people down there. Everything is fine, and we move on to the Monday videos. Not this week. This video is going to be very different, because what I'm going to do first is show you my top 25, and I'm going to have to explain a few things because I don't know what to do. I'll go ahead and show you my top 6 right now. So, in my top 6, I have Alabama number 1, Penn State at number 2. I do still have TCU at number 3. Sorry, Dogs fans. I still think their win at Oklahoma State is more impressive than your win at Notre Dame. Number 5, I have Wisconsin, and at number 6, I have Miami. So, those are 6 of the 8 unbeatens left in the country after the first half of the college football season. I put them at 1 through 6. That seems fair. The other 2 undefeateds are South Florida and Central Florida, and I apologize to all the fans of those teams. I can't quite put you above some of these one-loss teams just yet. But soon, there may not be any one-loss teams. Everybody's just going to lose. I've had a lot of people in the comment section over the last few weeks ask me if this season so far has looked and reminded me of the 2007 season. And the answer to that is not quite yet. There was a lot of weirdness in that 2007 season a decade ago. There was a lot of huge upsets, but most of those upsets came when teams were ranked 1 or 2. There was a lot of weird top 10 rivalry upsets as well, but a lot of those upsets literally was number 1 would lose, we would move number 2 to number 1, then number 2 would lose, then we put in another new number 1, then number 1 would lose, and the whole thing would just unravel from the top down. Up until this week, this college football season hasn't really been that chaotic, and then this weekend hit. So, before I actually show you and unveil my top 25, I need you to know a few things. I need you to think about my thought process a little bit. So, I put a lot of pressure on me when I make these top 25s, way more than I should. I don't get a real vote. But I feel like I owe it to you guys to try to give as fair a representation of how I view the teams, how I view their wins, their losses, the pecking order. And, I really enjoy when y'all comment down below and tell me, like, how could you have Georgia below TCU? And I go, well, Oklahoma State, I think, is a tougher team than Notre Dame. And then most people go, well, I think differently, but okay, or whatever, right? I don't really get into a lot of heated arguments down there. You guys are very nice, and I really appreciate it. But I feel like I need to do my best to try to make that as respectable as possible. I don't want there to be any personal bias in there. I don't want there to be a whole lot of subjectivity. So, I watched Washington's season burn to the ground last night, and that was at about 2 o'clock my time. From 2 until 4:30, 5 o'clock, I'm not even kidding when I say this, I made 6 or 7 different top 25 rankings, and I was very sleepy, and so I decided to go to bed. I woke up this morning, or this afternoon, woke up this morning, had some personal stuff with my dad, then had to work on it again, and that's why the video is going up a little bit later than normal. What I did is, I didn't like any of those top 25s. I kept feeling like I ranked some teams way too low, some teams way too high. Some teams, when you look at my top 25, and I'm not trying to build this up too much, but you are going to see some teams jump way up, and you're going to go, why in the hell did you move them that high up? I don't know. You're going to see other teams drop way, way down, and you're going to be like, really? They dropped that far down? Yeah, I don't know why. So here's my thought process. I kind of, at the end of all those top 25s, whenever I would get finished with one, I would hate it. I would ball it up on a little piece of paper and just throw it on the floor. Well, today I kind of took all of those little pieces of paper balls and I unraveled all of them and kind of just came up with a composite top 25. I am not happy with this top 25. I do not think it is an accurate representation of where these teams are, and neither will you. You are going to get very angry at the top 25 list that I'm about to show you because it doesn't make any sense. There's no sense in my top 25, and I need you to know that it doesn't make any sense. I need you to know that Clemson is really far down. Really far down. And I need you to know that Michigan State is way too high on this list. Okay? I know that. You don't have to type that down in the comment section. I understand. But here's my thought process. And it's kind of the same way you think about every top 25 list every week. You start comparing undefeated teams versus 1-loss teams versus 2-loss teams, and soon against 3 and 4-loss teams when you get down in the 20-25 range. And you start going, okay, well, they beat this team, but they lost to this team, right? But this team, they lost to this team, but beat this team and this team. And it's really hard to get that pecking order going. And I had some comments last week, both with my poll and the actual AP Top 25 poll, that raise great questions, such as Michigan State beat Michigan. Both of those teams have 1 loss. Why is Michigan State not ranked ahead of Michigan? They weren't ahead of Michigan in my poll. They weren't ahead of Michigan in the actual Top 25 poll. There are a lot of factors at stake. Now, the AP, if you've already seen it, the AP has remedied that. Michigan State is 1 spot ahead of Michigan in this week's poll after Michigan State beat Minnesota and Michigan beat Indiana in overtime in a game in which the refs robbed the Hoosiers, by the way, on that onside kick. But you start looking at things. So you go, okay, NC State beat Syracuse, who beat Clemson. So shouldn't NC State be ahead of Clemson? But do you really think NC State's better than Clemson? Clemson has wins against Virginia Tech and Louisville and Auburn. But Louisville gave up 45 points to Boston College in their 3rd loss of the season. Auburn just lost to an unranked LSU team who lost to Troy and got beat by 30 points to Mississippi State. Maybe Auburn's not that good. Maybe both of those losses don't count. But they beat Virginia Tech, who beat West Virginia. So maybe Virginia Tech is good? But we don't really know. Other than Clemson and West Virginia, their schedule has not been the strongest yet. They will get tests later on down the road. What about LSU? Should they even be ranked? I mean, they lost to Troy. Well, Syracuse lost to Middle Tennessee, and then they beat Clemson. Should a 3-loss Syracuse team be ranked? I don't know. Memphis beat UCLA. Then they got stomped by UCF, but then they beat undefeated Navy. Should Memphis be ranked? I don't know. Virginia beat Boise State, who crushed undefeated San Diego State, who beat Stanford. Should the Virginia Cavaliers, with 1 loss, should they be ranked? Georgia beat Notre Dame, who beat Michigan State, who beat Michigan. What do we do there? Oklahoma versus Ohio State. It feels like the Ohio State team that Oklahoma beat was not the Ohio State team that's been playing the last couple of weeks. That's not the same one that played the Nebraska team that we saw this weekend. Does that mean that as of right now, it looks like Ohio State may be better than Oklahoma, but of course Oklahoma won that game in Ohio Stadium. They should be higher than them, right? I don't know. What about the two lost teams? What about Stanford, who lost to USC, right? They lost to USC and they lost to San Diego State, a group of 5 team who now has 1 loss. USC lost to Washington State. Washington State lost to Cal. But Stanford is clicking on all cylinders right now. They just stomped Oregon into the ground. Stanford is probably, based on eye test alone over the last week or two, the best team in the country. USC should have lost that game to Utah if Utah didn't go for a 2-point conversion for some reason. So how do you rank these teams? I don't know. So I showed you my top 6. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, with a couple of exceptions, you could probably put any team from 7 to 25, and I would probably be fine with it. You could probably put almost any of those 1-loss teams in almost any order, and I would find a way to justify you doing that. And that makes this incredibly difficult. Then you have the undefeated UCF and USF teams. Where do you slot them compared to the 1-loss Power 5 teams? I don't know. So I'm now going to, with all of that prelude, that's my thought process last night. That's why I couldn't sleep until like 5:30 in the morning. All right? I know there's bigger issues in the world, but this one consumed me last night. So I'm now going to show you my top 25 list for this week. Please note, it will change a whole lot next week. A whole lot. This is not locked in. I do not think that some of these teams should be ahead of other teams, but I can't in good consciousness justify putting Clemson ahead of Michigan State right now. Do I think if Clemson played Michigan State with a healthy quarterback, they would beat them? Yes, I do. I just can't justify it. So don't get upset. Don't yell at me, okay? I'm your friend, your friendly neighborhood Dustin, friendly neighborhood college football lifer. So with all of that being said, here's my top 25 list. I'm going to try to explain it as best I can. At number 7, I have Oklahoma State. I think at this moment, based on what I've seen, they are the best 1-loss team in the country. I also think their loss to TCU is the best loss, if you can put it that way, in the country. I have TCU at 3 and Georgia at 4. Therefore, I have Oklahoma State at 7 and Notre Dame at 8. Then I have Michigan State at 9, who lost to Notre Dame but beat Michigan. I know, they moved up 15 spots in my stupid little poll, and beating Minnesota is not worthy of 15 spots. I get it. They are moved ahead of Ohio State. That's just the way it is right now. So Ohio State's 10, UCF, USF, and undefeated at 11 and 12. They moved up big. Somehow USC stayed the exact same. I need to remind you that I made this list before I saw the top 25 poll, and I only confer with my top 25 from last week when I'm looking at how I rank them afterwards. So teams like USC that were in the same spot, it was not a slight. It was not, that's where they were last week, that's where they are this week. Just need to clarify that. At number 14, I had NC State. 15, Oklahoma, whose loss to Iowa State really is not a good loss. Somehow I kept Michigan exactly where they are. I moved Stanford up 6. Now we have the big drops from the weekend. Clemson, I dropped from number 1 to number 18. I understand. Backup quarterback for the second half. Injured quarterback for the first half. Backup kicker. But you lost to a Syracuse team who lost to Middle Tennessee. I can't put all of those conditions in for you. That's not my fault. I'm sorry. You got outplayed from beginning to end by that Syracuse team. And if it wasn't for a defensive score, you wouldn't have even been close. Right behind them, I have Washington. Right behind them, I have Washington State. Not a good weekend for that entire state as a whole and for the Pac-12 conference, to be completely honest with you. I dropped them 11th and 13th, respectively. Those were both 2 bad wins. Even though I respect Cal, that's still a pretty bad win to have 7 turnovers because Clemson drops back, Virginia Tech drops back. Because Virginia Tech is 21 and has a loss, I kept them ahead of West Virginia, who I bring back into the top 25, as I do A&M and LSU. Put LSU above Auburn. They're both 2-loss teams, and LSU beat Auburn. Auburn, I dropped 16 spots back to 25. So that is my weird, wacky top 25 poll. It looks so different from the AP top 25. We'll get to that in just a second. Dropping out of my top 25 is Utah, Navy, and San Diego State. And my next 5 teams kind of on the bubble are Iowa, Georgia Tech, Texas Tech, Kentucky, and Memphis. So now let's take a look at the actual top 25 poll. And our number 1 is Alabama, and for the first time this season, they have all 61 first place votes. Penn State, Georgia move up 1. TCU jumps into the top 5 at number 4. Wisconsin also jumps in the top 5 at number 5. Then Ohio State is the highest one-loss team, 1 spot ahead of Clemson. Behind Clemson, who dropped 5 spots, you have Miami, undefeated Miami. And that tells you that the voters do not have confidence in this Miami team, which I understand. They haven't exactly played all around the best football in the country yet, but I do think it's kind of interesting they have them behind 2 one-loss teams at this point in the season. Obviously, I did not, but that was more on respect more than faith, I guess you could say. If Clemson is fully healthy and Miami is fully healthy, if Ohio State is fully healthy and ready to go and they play Miami, I do think Ohio State beats Miami. I do think Clemson beats Miami. So I do think that's fine. I just think it's kind of disrespectful to the Hurricanes, to be honest with you. Then rounding up the top 10, you have Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. USC, they only dropped Washington 7 spots to number 12, ahead of Notre Dame, whose only loss is a 1-point loss at home to Georgia. That's kind of interesting. Then Virginia Tech, they did drop Washington State, also back 7 spots to 15. NC State at 16 moves up 4. This is their highest ranking since September 7th, 2003. I also meant to mention a few minutes ago, Penn State is number 2 for the first time since Halloween 1999. It's been a while, Nittany Lions. Then tying NC State at 16 was South Florida. Then Michigan State, 1 spot ahead of Michigan, as I mentioned earlier. Then UCF at number 20. UCF is beating people pretty badly. They also have a win over Maryland, which I think is better than South Florida's Big Ten win against Illinois. But both of them are still kind of held back a little bit. Then you get into 2-loss territory. You got Auburn, and then Stanford, then West Virginia, and then LSU, who beat Auburn. Then you have 1 loss, Memphis, who knocked off undefeated Navy last week, with West Virginia, LSU, and Memphis moving in to the top 25. Dropping out of the poll was San Diego State, Texas Tech, and Navy. But the next 5 up in order, my next 5 up is not in order. Theirs is, based on the extra votes that teams got in different points. It's San Diego State is 26, A&M 27, Iowa State 28, Virginia, and Kentucky in the top 30, which is pretty interesting. As far as the conferences break down, the Big Ten leads all conferences in the country with 5. The ACC, SEC, Big 12, and Pac-12 all have 4 apiece, while the American still has 3, with Memphis moving in and taking Navy's spot, and of course there's still Notre Dame. So if you put them side by side, it is absolutely pure chaos. Where my teams are green and red is where my difference is, whether mine are higher or lower based on where the AP poll has them. You can kind of check that out there, and I'm not even going to go through it. It's just pure chaos. And again, I understand where my teams are ranked doesn't totally make sense. It's just that's the way the cookie crumbles, I guess. So there you go. The most stressful top 25 poll I have ever done. I did mine before theirs came out, which thank goodness. I obviously have Clemson dropping way further than they did. The loss to Syracuse was not good, and I understand. Backup kicker, backup quarterback. Still don't understand why Zarek Cooper was in there and not Hunter Johnson. Coaches must see something differently than I do. I just don't get it. Kicker missed 2 field goals, and the Tigers lost by a field goal in a hostile environment against a quarterback in Eric Dungy, who was highly motivated. I made videos on that and the Washington State game, but as the weekend rolled on, frankly, there was just too many upset videos to make, so I just left it at those 2. This weekend really threw a monkey wrench in the entire state of college football. It is unbelievably weird right now, and it's really hard to tell where all of these 1-loss teams fit into the pecking order, and then you start having 2-loss teams like West Virginia and Stanford kind of creep in there and kind of get into the top 20 and take some spots away. I also think it's interesting. I've been accused of not having enough respect for USF over the last few weeks, and here I go putting them just outside the top 10, and the pollsters have them tied at 16. I put USF and UCF ahead of defending champ Clemson. I don't know. I think next week will be an extraordinarily illuminating week of college football. You got the big USC Notre Dame matchup. That'll help square some things away, and in all honesty, may end up eliminating the Pac-12 from the college football playoff altogether, because Washington State's is not going to be anywhere near the Apple Cup that we all thought we may end up getting at the end of the season, kind of like what we did at the end of last season for the division. Stanford is still in there in the mix. TCU, Georgia, Penn State had the best bye week in program history this week, I think. Ohio State has a bye week this week as they gear up to play Penn State, while the Nittany Lions play Michigan. UCF takes on Navy. What are some of the other? Clemson has a bye week, which they desperately need. Alabama plays Tennessee, so they have a bye week. Mostly kidding, Vol fans. If you didn't score touchdowns against South Carolina, you might not against Alabama. Anyway, now I'm just starting to ramble. Yes, this is, if there was ever a time, if you've watched any of these top 25 videos, and a lot of you have, these videos routinely get over 1,000, sometimes 2,000 views. I need you to tell me your top 25 poll down below. If you've never done it before, especially, I need you to tell me your top 25 poll down below. And if you've done it the previous 2 weeks, tell me how far teams dropped. How far did Auburn, Washington State, and Clemson drop in your poll from last week? That's something I think is pretty interesting, and it was pure chaos, and now I desperately want to hear from you, probably more than any other top 25 poll I've ever done on this channel. So let me know that down below. Phew, we all got through that. Well, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a big thumbs up. Click the subscribe button right there in the circle, or watch any of the other videos over there to the right. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, until next time. Little package. We were just going to go into this weekend. There may be a couple of struggles. A couple of top 25 teams may lose, sure. That tends to happen. It's kind of weird when they don't. But, you know, if number 23, I'm just throwing a number out, lost, whatever, right? 4 top 10 teams lost, all to unranked teams. 7 top 25 teams lost. So, I don't really know what to do. At this point, there are a couple of things that are with a quarterback who should have never been on the field, traveling up to Syracuse in a redemption game for Syracuse's quarterback, in the biggest win that Syracuse's program has had since Donovan McNabb left, probably, at least that comes to my brain. And both of those last 2 games were on Friday the 13th, because of course they were. That's before 3 other top 25 teams lost, all of them to unranked teams, on a weekend where everyone thought everything was going to be in this nice, perfect... Hey, lifers, Dustin here, and I'm going to be completely honest with you, as transparent as I can possibly be. I have no idea what to do. Absolutely none. I have no idea what to do. Nothing matters. Everything got turned upside down this weekend. I stayed up until 2 o'clock Eastern Time watching Arizona State beat Washington at home. That is clear, and a whole lot of things that are not. So, this episode is going to be very different than any of the top 25 episodes I've done in the first 3 years that I've actually done this type of video, this type of show. Normally, I show the AP Top 25, I made a few notes about what I thought about the rankings, then I'll put up my Top 25, talk about why I slotted a few teams where, then I put them up side by side, and we all go home. The same weekend where number 10 Auburn, who looked indestructible all the way up until at least the Georgia game, lost to an LSU team who 2 weeks ago lost to Troy. That is before on Friday night, or I guess after, on Friday night, Washington State had 7 turnovers and got destroyed at home, or at, I can't even talk, on the road at Cal, which that game aired right after Clemson